Welcome to the Ignatius Press podcast. My name is Rose Travick, and I am your host for this episode. And today we are joined by Eleanor Nicholson. Eleanor is an amazing person. First of all, she's a homeschooling mom of 6, and somehow in all of her spare time has managed to be a literary scholar, a Gothic novelist, the resident Victorian literature instructor at Homeschool Connections. She's also the editor of the Ignatius Press Critical Edition series classic novel Dracula and the original novel published by Ignatius Press, A Bloody Habit. So thank you so much for joining us, Eleanor.
Thank you so much for having me, Rose.
Well, you're the perfect person to talk about books this time of year. We're going to talk about Halloween, controversies, should Catholics read horror, what type of books we should be reading as Catholics during this spooky season, and what not to read. So we have a lot of opinions, and I'm looking forward to exploring this topic with you more because I think it's really important this time of year. So
I agree. This is usually the time of year when people want to talk to me.
Right, exactly. This is your season. So how did you get, I mean, what I remember when I first learned about you was like your love of Dracula with the Ignatius Critical Editions, which is kind of random. I mean, most people that are into literature might be like, well, what do you study? Well, Jane Austen or, the Bronte sisters or maybe Dickens, but Dracula. So I'm fascinated by this. How did you get into Dracula?
It took me a really long time. I'm a Victorianist by disposition, but I didn't read Dracula until I was an undergraduate. I was terrified. I wasn't going to read that book. I don't read creepy stuff.
Right.
And I took a Gothic novel course as an undergraduate, and I just fell in love with the genre. I was very well versed in other genres, mystery novels from a very early age. And my mother was an omnivorous reader, so we read everything. So you say Dickens, and I mean, probably Dickens had the greatest influence on me as a writer in my entire life. But then I read Dracula and I thought, oh my goodness, this is a magnificent train wreck of a novel. This is so good. And then it actually led to me becoming a published author on a scholarly side as well, because I reached out to Joseph Pierce. This was over 20 years ago, and said, I admire your work. I'm in a Marxist anti-Catholic English department.
Oh my gosh.
Can you guide me? And he said, I'd love to see your work. So I sent Joseph my article on Dracula, and he said, I'll publish it in the St. Austin Review. And then I came to work for him on the St. Austin Review. And then when Ignatius wanted to do a critical edition of Dracula, he said, I know who should do it. I'd been doing a lot of the work in the sort of the background, writing his footnotes for Ignatius Critical Edition. And when I wrote to him later and said, I've written a novel and it's about vampires and Dominican vampire slayers, he introduced me to the novelist Tim Powers, and he and I became friends. And then Tim and Joseph approached Ignatius Press and said, here's a novel, we think you should publish it, which is how I got Bloody Habit published. And then it's just, I've returned to it. I've taught Dracula so many times. I teach all through the Victorian era. I teach Jane Austen. I could teach anything in English literature, but I tend to be about 1750 onwards, until about 1830, and then I'm not really interested in most cases. But no, it's the genre is such a rich one, and I have so much fun when I'm teaching Dracula. It's just makes me laugh.
That's fascinating. And I will tell you, so, I've had the Ignatius Critical Editions full series on my shelf for years. I've read most of them. Never Dracula and not Frankenstein, but I'm going to try to change that in the future. But last year, my well-read mom group read Dracula, and we used the Ignatius Critical Edition. So I think there were like 10,000 ladies all over the country reading Dracula, probably most of them for the first time. And I really enjoyed it too. And it was like really creepy and scary. And, like I did think maybe I had some nightmares about it, so this kind of brings me to like, what is the value in reading horror? Like, is there a value in reading horror? I guess first I should ask. And then like, if so, what types of spooky or scary novels could Catholics read and learn something about, the nature of good and evil, and where's the line? So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I should say I was thrilled when Well-Read Mom chose Dracula. I said, oh, good, because I figured there were a lot of moms who were the way I was before I read Dracula, which was, I'm not reading that. and then be astonished by what the book actually contains. I see a
Sure.
huge value in reading it, and a classic Gothic. So I would put a division there. I'd say that horror seems to be more applicable to what we see post the Universal Studios treatment of the Gothic.
Right.
Those are also fun. But we have seen a march towards a more, it's even darker, more nihilistic. But the original Gothic trend, which has all sorts of irregularities in it, and even prompted some suspicion in the reading public, saying, if you read that, what's it going to do in corrupting your mind and your morals? But those early examples, things like Dracula and certainly like Frankenstein, have such moral and philosophical depth behind them, um, that in that genre you can tangle with things, deep themes like life and death, salvation and damnation. You reading Frankenstein, who am I and why was I
Mhm.
created and what's my relationship with my creator? But there are elements in it that are problematic. Frankenstein was born of the Romantic poets, and they were extremely troubled individuals, especially the dark
Right.
Romantic poets. And the whole idea of the uh, wicked vampire or sketchy, transgressive romantic figure that
Mm.
your daughter rebelliously chases after. And that's Byron. He was called mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He was amoral, but I still teach Byron and I still teach
Mm.
Shelley. And I say, let's look closely at these poets. Let's look closely at the good things in the romantic ideology, but let's look at the dangers. So I think that there's so much richness for us to explore in good Gothic, or even some of the Gothic novels are outrageously bad, and that's also entertaining. So I see that value. Where for me, the line is, it's not just old versus new, because Tim Powers is a consummate novelist of supernatural, preternatural power, and his deeply moral books. And he's new and he's still writing. He's been writing for, decades.
Mm.
Devoutly Catholic and brilliant novelist, but he doesn't cross the line into let's call it a pornographic presentation of evil. He's not
Mm.
presenting evil
That's
as though
powerful. Yeah.
it's something that you get off on, that is attractive, that's in the same way that you wouldn't want to read something that was graphic in its depiction of so-called romance, and you go, this is not romance, this is lust. Don't read
Right.
that. Because
Right.
everything you read is passing through your mind, and you're giving it opportunity to engage with your imagination. So I'm a big proponent of the purification and the protection of the imagination. um so there are even books that are not bad books. I think there's a famous French decadent writer named Huysmans, and he wrote La Basse, which is about the damned. It's about the Black Mass.
Mm.
And I was going to read that because I thought, oh, well, Huysmans very important. I should read this, earnest young grad student. And actually, Joseph Pierre said to me, don't. He said, you don't need to read that book. And I do not think it will give you peace. I think it will disrupt
Oh.
you and hurt you spiritually. And I was a little humbled, like, oh, I guess I can't read it. But also, whew, I don't
Right.
want to
Right.
read.
I really didn't want to read it anyway. So.
Because Dracula, yes, I too, it keeps you up at night. And you're creeped out and you pull the blankets up a little bit further around your neck. But it didn't make me rush to the confessional sobbing because I had transgressed by reading it. And
Right.
I think some modern horror, like many so-called romances today, are just they have filth in them, and filth of
Right. Yeah.
presenting evil as something it's not.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because like our culture like simultaneously kind of like denies that evil exists, right? Like
Yeah.
relativism, I'm okay, you're okay, whatever you believe is fine for you and what I believe
Yeah.
is fine for me. So that's kind of like, there's no objective evil. But at the
Yeah.
same time is really like almost obsessed with what you called, I think you just said like the pornographic presentation of evil, which I thought was
Yeah.
so powerful. So I was just at Barnes and Noble's yesterday or the day before yesterday, and of course they have all of the Halloween,
Yeah.
decorations out, and I'm like, oh gosh, it's horrible, just really disgusting stuff and disturbing because a lot of it's marketed towards kids. But then in the back, there's like this huge dark fantasy section, and
Yeah.
like that's just there year round, and I was just like. wow, and just the covers were just so disturbing, and a lot of this is marketed at, I have teenagers, two teenage girls right now, and then a couple boys coming up behind them, and it's hard because we're kind of they're getting interested in more. They've done a lot of the children's, traditional children's literature, and now like, okay, where's the line in terms of what they can read? Well, that for sure, you're not reading that. Because it really is disturbing. And it's interesting because the way that kind of evil creatures, this is one observation I've had that others have had too, the way that these like traditionally evil creatures like vampires, werewolves, zombies, that they are portrayed is like, oh, they're misunderstood and they're not
Yeah.
really bad, and oh, maybe it would even be good to fall in love with one of these people. So what can you say about this, like as parents, like how do we communicate this to our kids, like the difference in these types of novels and why like we shouldn't be reading those?
Oh, this is a huge one, and it's one that I teach, like I said, I teach Dracula. I teach my own novels, but with a warning label. We have book clubs for it. I'm saying that they have to be mature enough to read this. And the biggest thing for me, I do two biggest things. So one is parents reading with their children. So even as they reach high school age, it's like if it's a book that is complex and has complex themes, that you as a parent be accompanying them in their reading, because
Mm.
I learned the facts of life reading the Bible. I mean, and that was a shock.
Right.
Um,
So
and
true.
but I was so used to having a conversation with my mother that immediately it was a conversation point. And as parents, I feel very strongly that, I mean, I homeschool. Of course, I want to protect and but also to prepare my children. They're encountering things in the culture all the time that, unless I put them in a cave or a cage and we never go out, I'd rather be there while I still have control of the narrative and can guide it and say, wow, that's a horrifying thought. Oh, that's problematic, don't you think? Why would that bother you? And even my children will see those sorts of displays at a store and go, oh, mommy, look at that. And they will say, well, why is that more troubling? Why is that more troubling? Let's unpack it together. And the second point I'd say with young people is you've already laid the foundation in reading good children's literature and helping them to read good adult literature, not just classical, but I mean, if they are interested in more Gothic themes, reading somebody like Tim Powers, who was extremely powerful as a writer, and sometimes quite terrifying, but he doesn't cross the lines, and you know that there is a deep moral message, and that you can be reading this and engaging with it. It will make you then turn, even if somebody hands you this and says, "This is my favorite fantasy book," and you start reading it, and you'll go, "This is so badly written, I can't even read it." It's not just there's no depth here. It's like Twilight, forget it. This is just not just deleterious smut. It's silly and it's badly written. So but also from that, it's from that same evil is transgressive, evil is misunderstood. Like, no, evil's evil. And I mean that too. We can trace that back to the Romantics too. When you read Frankenstein, you'll notice the creature is never called the monster. So you ask yourself, who's monstrous, Victor Frankenstein or the creature he created? That's one of the huge moral questions of the novel. But there are clearly immoral, amoral, horrifying things that happen in the novel. And you're like, well, I can totally condemn that action. 100%. I'm not going to say, I don't misunderstand brutal murder. Brutal murder is brutal murder.
So it's
So,
kind of like, when we're looking at books that we read ourselves, or I think
mhm,
like we can relate to as parents. I have 5 kids, you have 6 kids, and they're getting older, and where's
yeah,
the line there? There's some books that are just like, okay, there's no redeeming value here.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
smutty, they depict evil as good. Like those are just like hard pass on those. But
yeah,
there's kind of maybe this middle category of, there may be some things that are not, that are problematic, as you say, but there's some redeeming value. It's something that maybe we should be reading too as parents and keeping those conversations open. And I
yeah,
love what you said about, like, we do have to raise children that will be able to live in our culture.
yeah,
We're not going to be able, as much as we may want to, we're not going to be able to keep them in a bubble. I mean, I live in South Florida in a very Catholic area, I'll just say, and even here, like, this is not a bubble. Like our kids that, they go to school, they have friends, and or like if you
Yeah.
homeschool, you're doing activities outside of the home and you're meeting other people. Like we have to also prepare them, to not be like, oh my gosh, I saw that display and now I can't live anymore. I'm so traumatized. Like, no, like
Yeah.
how do we talk about this? How do we engage the culture and challenge the culture? So I think that's
Yes.
an important part of, you can't just shut it all out necessarily. You have
I
to
think you
learn how to deal with it.
I think you'd
Yeah.
also then run the risk of curiosity of the,
Right.
can't look.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
so one thing recently, I had a box of books coming to me, and the printing house had messed it up. So a box arrived. I opened it up, and I said to my husband, "These are witchcraft manuals.
Oh
These
no.
aren't these my so
That goes into the
what do we
hard
do?"
pass
I was like,
category.
"Oh my gosh, what on earth?" So we actually contacted a Dominican, and we worked it out with the publisher or whatever, and the printer said, "Oh no, it's our bad. Dispose of them how you will." And they said, "You can donate them or whatever you want." I was like, "Whatever I want is." I'm sorry. There was a burning ban at that time. It was a drought, so we couldn't burn them. So we contacted a Dominican and said, How do we dispose of these?" And when we
Hmm.
talked to the children about it, my husband and I, what we were told, destroy it metaphysically. It's like, it is no longer a book. Make it no longer a book. So we were like tearing it to small pieces and like soaking it in water and then trashing it, saying that nobody can now use this book. But as we were doing it, my husband and I were doing it like this. And we said to the children, you're not coming near these, and saying that here, this is not even, I don't even want this language or the sketches or whatever's in this book. I don't want it in my mind. And saying that
Right.
this is not, oh, hey, Dracula, or which, I mean, really, please read Dracula. And then you'll say, oh, people who are objecting to it, this is not what I thought this book was going to be. It's not just, oh, I saw something on the news, or I saw a movie, or I read a book that I went, oh, I feel like that crossed a line. This is honest to goodness
Yeah.
wicked, and we
Yeah.
need to
Hard pass
dispose of it.
category.
Yes. Uh,
So
but also to say to them that I don't even want the curiosity. I don't
right.
even want those words, those images in my head. So that's not, oh, hey, look, no curiosity whatsoever. And curiosity there is you do not play with the occult. You don't
Right.
mess with that. But then being able to read, I mean, reading fantasy on a wide range. And I do tend towards the more traditional ones, but giving them that moral scope, but also that literary taste and
That's so
discernment.
important. That's so
So,
important. And when they're younger, you are in control of what they read.
yes.
So like
Yes.
that doesn't last forever. So take that take advantage of that and really be intentional about what they're reading when you are still setting those boundaries in your
Yeah.
home. So that they do develop that taste. I love that. So well, thanks for sharing that. I think speaking of engaging the culture, I did want to just, we're getting close to Halloween. So I just want to bring that up. How First of all, there's a lot of controversy now about like, should Catholics even be celebrating Halloween? And we had a little pre-conversation. We both say yes, there's a place for this. So, but how, in light of like the liturgical calendar and the feast days and the Catholic tradition, how do you suggest, or what are your tips for Catholics living in this culture, how to celebrate Halloween in a way that doesn't glorify evil?
Well, first thing I would say is there's a great Dominican source on this. There's Father Augustine Thompson has a very short defense of Halloween from an historical standpoint, seeing the origins of
Fascinating.
Halloween. Absolutely in Catholic. It's a Catholic tradition. And it's largely arisen from things like, the establishment of All Souls and All Saints, which were over 1,000 years old in the practice of the church. But also there were subsequent developments with the Black Plague and Memento
Mm,
Mori and the Dance of the Dead. So that's a little bit at play here. You had a little bit of Irish Catholics saying we're taking care of the saints and we're taking care of those in purgatory. We need to take care of the demons too by making a lot of noise on the eve of All Hallows. So there's that going on, and then there's finally persecution of anti-Catholics, which led to there's also persecution of English Catholics during the very long anti-Catholic tradition in England, which led to trick-or-treating. So it all sort of melds together in the English American immigrant melting pot, and that's how we get modern Halloween with some additions now. So it's in large part, I think, harmless to dress up even as ghosts and ghouls. I was a vampire one year, not surprisingly. I really wanted to be Renfield in Dracula, the lunatic, but I was overruled. I had to be a vampire. Um, but no, so you can do that part, but so long as it's not grotesque, again, that sort of pornographic presentation of evil. But
Right.
sometimes driving through our neighborhood, there is one person who every year they set up so much and
Right.
it's so ghoulish and it's so gross. They even have a big metal container and they put it upside down what looks like a body. It's supposed to be somebody dying in acid. That's
Yeah, it's
just
a little too far there.
it's just like,
Yeah.
come on, it's not. Do you decorate like that for Christmas? Really? It's just so much energy being put into grotesquerie, not necessarily grotesquerie that leads to something that's morally efficacious. I mean, you want grotesquerie, you want violence. You read Charles Dickens, you read Flannery O'Connor, but they understand the moral arc to it, right?
It's not just there for the sake of just having it there. There's
Looking
a
at
point
yeah.
to it. There's it fits in with the story. And yeah, and I love the way that you explain that. And I'm gonna read that article. I don't think I've ever read that the article that you mentioned.
It's a good one. I'll send you the link and maybe we can drop it in show notes but you also then really have to practice All Saints in
Right.
going to church. And at our parish, it becomes a huge celebration, especially this year. It's falling on a Saturday, followed by All Souls on a Sunday. Just huge. So we're doing an adoration vigil, and then we do rosary all day. We have a columbarium under our Dominican priory, rosary all day with the dead on All Souls. So, I mean, visiting graveyards. I love visiting graveyards and praying for the dead. And so
remember your
doing
death,
all of that.
memento mori. I mean, I think that's if you're looking for a way to kind of make your Halloween more Catholic, that theme there. I mean, you could do skeletons, skulls, graveyards, and that is all leading up to, All Souls Day, remembering to pray for the dead. So I think that's a very way to take, Halloween and still, like I said, engage the culture. Don't just totally withdraw from Halloween, but be an example of what it should be in connection with All Saints Day, All Souls Day. And of course, the tradition of having kids dress up as saints is great. I love the saints costumes that kind of like double as like a Halloween kind of creepy, and a saint, like Saint Lucy with the plate with the eyeballs on it is one of the common ones. So, I think, and I think too, like, we need to also send our kids a message that like we can still have fun. Like, being Catholic is fascinating and it's fun, and we can engage our culture. We don't have to totally withdraw and be scared of everything. So, but I also did just want to touch on this because I do think there is the element for sure of Halloween just getting like when we were kids, it was fairly tame still. It does seem to have gotten like insane by some people. And so like, how to explain that? Like when you do drive by the neighbor's house, that just takes it way over the top, or you go into stores and there's these like really over, like really just like you said, grotesque kind of sick displays. Like, but we are like, we have to drive, we have to walk around our neighborhood, we have to go to the grocery store, we're gonna encounter these. How do you explain that to children?
Depending on the age, it so much of it is just constant ongoing conversations. But it affects us in it's many topics. So I can remember years ago, I was driving and my second looked out, the second, who was probably 6. We were driving down the road and we saw a young woman who, I think her hair was blue. She was covered in piercings. I mean, everything, tattoos, piercings. And my daughter, we were stuck at a stoplight or something. And my daughter went, "Mommy, look at that woman." And I said, "Oh, yes." And before I could say anything, she went, "I don't think she knows that God loves her." I was like, "No, I don't think so either." So my children will see it as points of confusion. We'll pass a church. Is that a Catholic church? Oh, no, it says Baptist. Oh, how sad. They don't have the fullness of the faith. What do the Baptists believe? Oh, this is a point of confusion, Daddy says. So then you're discussing every aspect of the culture, and they're not afraid to say, "Oh, that's repulsive, mommy. They don't understand." These are probably people who would be terrified if they saw a dead body. Um, which, when my grandfather died at the height of COVID, we had a private in his home wake, and all of the children were able to get to him. He had over 100 direct descendants who were going through his home to be with him. Um, and so the children were right there praying next to a dead body, talking that through with them. Most people in this culture, they might put creepy things and grotesque things in their yard. That doesn't mean that they're actually comfortable being in a graveyard or being at a wake where the coffin's open.
Right.
So,
And some people will even say like, "Oh, you should shield children from death. You shouldn't talk about death. You shouldn't, take them to a funeral," which, I definitely disagree with that, because that, to me, the death is a natural part of life.
yeah,
And, but you said those age appropriate conversations, and obviously you don't
yeah,
want to share something,
yeah,
really, really depressing or really sad, but like, like I have an aunt who's dying right now, and we're talking about it, and she's at the, towards the end of her life, and, we're praying for her, and it's not like a taboo subject. So it is kind of interesting, again, this interesting dynamic that we see in our culture of like, oh, children don't talk about death. It's, but then let's also put up really creepy stuff for Halloween,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the answer, neither of those are really good. They're both kind of extreme.
they are.
And we need to find the way that isn't, basically encouraged by our faith, which is to talk about death in the appropriate way, and
Well,
to
and
remember
fear,
our death, right?
and to fear not, to fear
Right.
not. Be not afraid. Actually, the last thing we're doing at our parish is we're going to a parish retreat with a parish mission, which is all about death. So we're going from All Saints to All Souls to a retreat where we're talking about death for 3 days, and to
Wow.
see our lives in that context, because there's 100% death rate among people.
Right. There,
We're
there
all
sure
going.
is.
Um, and
Yep.
the more we're able to equip ourselves and children's, it just, rather than refusing to look at it. So it's all, I think, just balanced, mature, and for young children, parent led understanding is going to enrich and deepen their faith and equip them to be able to discern that makes me uncomfortable, that doesn't. This is fine.
Right.
Oh yeah, pumpkins, little kids, even a little kid dressed up as a vampire. But I'm not going to watch a movie of that glorifies vampirism and doesn't recognize it as evil.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's a very interesting perspective, Eleanor. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very helpful. And again, I'm definitely going to read that article, and we'll put it hopefully in the show notes down here too, so people can also look at that. So okay, turning a little bit towards our one of our favorite topics of conversation, books. We talked a little bit about Dracula. Interestingly, you have this book, A Bloody Habit, which you mentioned, which is about a vampire slaying Dominican priest. I mean, what on earth? This is so unique. I read this book when it first came out years ago, and I enjoyed it. But then I read Dracula for Well Read Mom, and then I reread A Bloody Habit last week. I enjoyed it so much. So I just thought it was so fun, so interesting. And again, it kind of gave you that spooky, like fall, creepy, which is not like a genre that I normally read, to be frank. But like I really enjoyed it. And I love how at the beginning of the of each chapter, you actually quote from Dracula. So that was really interesting to read after reading Dracula.
mhm.
And where did this idea come from? This is it's such a unique idea. Where did this come from?
Well, I had a theory. I had a theory while I was working on Dracula for, a very long time. And I had a theory that you would have a really effective vampire slayer would be somebody like a Dominican friar, someone who confects the Eucharist every day. The trappings of the preternatural aren't going to upset him. You need somebody who's pretty laid back about it, pretty, oh, this is not really that interesting. The really interesting work is over here, who's unflappable, right?
Hmm.
And I thought that would be a really good vampire slayer, but he would be a lousy narrator for a Gothic novel because you need the narrator to freak out. right? You need
Right.
someone who's like, oh my goodness, oh, it's horrible, it's scary. And not somebody who says, it's all just theatrics, ignore it. Booms, we got an exorcism, we're done. So I've often thought that the exorcists who are scared or excited or they'd be bad exorcists, right? You need somebody who's just sort of like, this is really just a little bit, it's just practical. It's a practical business.
It's something you got to do. Yeah. So
Ignore all the theatrics. And then I was, I had thought about it for a while, but then I was on a retreat. So I was staying with Dominican nuns and I was writing. I was working on something completely different than Dracula. And I saw a Dominican friar I knew who'd come to see the nuns, very brilliant, brilliant fellow, Father Thomas Joseph White. And he and I were together over dinner and he told me to take a nap. He said, that's what you always do on retreat. So I thought, oh, okay. Next day, I'm not a napper, but I'll take a nap. And I went to lay down. And right before I closed my eyes, I looked at the wall. And in this very simple room the nuns had given me, there was an image of Veronica's veil. So it's a disembodied floating head on a gold background, right? The icon not made by hands. And I thought, if Catholics are better at killing vampires, it's because they're weirder than vampires. And then I fell asleep and I had a nightmare and I woke up and wrote the first chapter of A Bloody Habit.
Well, I really enjoyed reading it. And so just to kind of correct me if I get anything wrong here, Eleanor, but this is about a world in which, like a world like we live in, only vampires are real.
Mm-hmm.
And they are this incredible manifestation of just pure evil. And It's set in London, and there's a vampire on the loose, and this man encounters people who are being affected by vampires, maybe even works for some vampires or becomes entangled in some. And he's an atheist or an agnostic person who just like doesn't believe in all that. And then he encounters this order of Dominicans, and I believe you're a lay Dominican, so I see the connection here. So like they're just so endearing, this order of Dominicans, because like you said, they're just kind of unflappable. Like, we just combat evil. And one of the things that I love, a theme that you mentioned, that's mentioned in the book, that the main character priest, Father Thomas Edmund, is that right? That he says is that, like, because you have this main character lawyer who's just freaking out all over the place. Like, I don't even believe in this, but I'm seeing all this. I'm seeing evidence, and I can't deny it anymore. And one of Father Thomas's things that he says is like, evil is not creative. Like, this is they don't have their own energy. They can only take good and subvert it and pervert it. And like, it's kind of dull, honestly. That's it. It's such an interesting theme to that book. And maybe can you talk a little bit more about that? Because you see a bit of the Thomistic philosophy and theology throughout the book in this.
Well, this brings us actually back to the Romantics, who deliberately misread Milton's Paradise Lost. And in Milton's Paradise Lost, they saw it as saying, well, really, Satan's the hero. And in Paradise Lost, there's a famous line where Satan talks about making a heaven out of this hell. So he's like, I'm really in charge because I can take hell. I can make it into what I want, and now it's somehow glamorous. So that's the lie of the satanic sublime, and it's the self-delusion, right? But that works really well for someone who getting immersed in that, someone who's going to be freaked out, who's going to be scared by, the content of Gothic nonsense. But you would, as I said, have a very practical response if you have an exorcist, a Dominican who's responding. And there's something else that's at play here, is that the English literary tradition is very, 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 very saturated in anti-Catholicism. And you see this in the Gothic tradition all over the place. The problem is that when you're dealing with the preternatural, you need all that Catholic stuff. So you
need the exorcist on deck.
you need the crosses and the holy water, garlic too, and all these things. But you need the Catholics. It's why in Dracula, Van Helsing says, for Dracula, London is the place of most promise, because they don't believe in him. And so that's the thing that's so upsetting to my character, John Kemp. He's like, I don't believe in vampires. But it's even more upsetting if these Catholics who are fighting the vampires have any sort of credibility. Because I've been taught that. I mean, who's worse, a vampire or a papist? So there's that tension too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was really fun to see that. And I just wanted to just really quickly read. There was this passage towards the end that I thought was so interesting as the main character is starting to realize that like, no, like these are evil is real. Vampires are real. And he's talking to the priest, and there's this great passage if anyone wants to look it up on page 325, but it ends with saying evil can create nothing. It can only corrupt what is and set up shadowy negative realities. Thus the vampire is a dark, mundane corruption of our sacrament. And again, there's that, Thomistic theology and philosophy there. Can you explain what this means when you see the vampire as a dark, mundane corruption of our sacrament?
The tradition of the vampire as the anti-Eucharist, it's way back in the Gothic genre, and it was very Bram Stoker when he wrote Dracula was very conscious of it. There was actually in his original plan, he was going to have a scene that was an anti-Last Supper with Count Dracula presiding over it. So he recognized it, but you can see the elements. So the Eucharist is the sacrifice of our Lord on behalf of all of us, right? Well, what is the vampiric sacrament is the taking of an unwilling victim for one's selfish aims, sucking the blood of another being. And that blood, the blood is the life, the blood is the life. Remember that line from Dracula, which the lunatic keeps saying over and over, because it's the Eucharistic symbolism or in the representation of that novel is extremely powerful. It was the most powerful theme for me when I read it, just the presentation of the Eucharist. So if you see the vampire as the anti-Eucharist, as bringing immortality, but not eternal life, this grotesque, withered, decaying body. I mean, that's what he is. He's this super physical creature bound unnaturally between life and judgment after death, the undead. Whereas when we eat the Eucharist, it's the food of the angels, right? It is the medicine of immortality. It is that which is not just food for the journey, but brings us to eternal life, where we will be before the wedding feast of the Lamb and engaged in the wedding feast of the Lamb. So, but if you read a vampire novel, a good vampire novel, and there are other good Catholic vampire novels. We have a little. It's a small community of us who play around in the Gothic together. But if you see that, the sacramental repercussions are huge. And I've had readers come to me and say, I was reading Dracula and I'm getting this weird Eucharist thing. Is that just in my head? I'm like, no, it's not in your head. It makes perfect sense. And something I had mentioned before we talked, a couple of years ago, I wrote a justification for the presence of Dominicans in such a novel, and I wrote it for Dominicans. It's my apologia, so I'll try to remember to get that to you as well, because there's a theological justification here. There is. Vampires sort of belong to us. The Gothic is very much our playground. Oh, one thing I should also mention about the Gothic, and something that I love here, is that one of the mechanisms in the Gothic, and it's a really crucial one, is that encountering monsters and being horrified by them, there's a little bit of a funhouse mirror effect, because it turns around and shows us that in this fallen world, because of original sin, I understand a monster because I am monstrous. And that doesn't mean that you then embrace the darkness, but it's then puts you on the same plane as every good character in a Gothic novel. A good Gothic novel, there's at least the potential for redemption, whether it's achieved or not. So for me too, it's saying I write Gothic in part because I am a monster in need of redemption, and I can
That is
recognize that.
powerful. That is powerful.
So
I love that. Well, let me tell you, I really am just going to recommend to anyone listening, and all my friends and probably my family will drive them crazy in the next few weeks about like this time of year, what a great time it is to pick up Dracula and read it, and then pick up A Bloody Habit and read it. And just to compare the two, I just think like they just pair together so well, and it's so interesting. And again, this is coming from someone who that's not my normal genre, but I enjoyed both of them so much. So thank you for writing them. And I did want to ask you, do you have any other books that you'd like to share with our audience?
well, I have written two other Thomas Edmund Gilroy books, Brother Wolf, which is about Franciscans and werewolves, and Wake of Malice, which is about Irish folklore, zombie leprechauns. But with
Oh,
that
fun.
same, with that same, and also I haven't mentioned it, but one of my awkward coping mechanisms is laughter. So I think there's a lot of potential for hilarity in these books. And I tried to lean on that deliberately. Some Gothic novelists, I think it's accidental. But I think Bram Stoker had a sense of humor. You can feel it when you read Dracula. But I'm pushing it a little bit further, I think. So no, I continue to write in that vein. And I should also say, I usually am reading murder mysteries or rereading the classics with my children. I'm reading Jane Austen and Charles Dickens and Agatha Christie, and
Right.
I'm very selective when I read Gothic. I'm very selective when I read Gothic just because, I'm easily scared.
Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing about, just everything about this topic today. It's such a great time of year again to dive into, a spooky book and to do it through the lens you're talking about, and to view, this encounter with the supernatural through the Catholic lens. And so we really appreciate that. Is there anything that you're working on currently? Any projects you want to share? Give a little teaser for?
Right now I'm doing some work for Ignatius. So we're preparing more Ignatius critical editions, but I'm working on
Yay.
Dickens. Gives me so much joy, and I'm teaching for Homeschool Connections, teaching the Romantics, and then we switch to Jane Austen. It's a great
Oh, how
pivot
fun.
there. But with the few brain cells I have left that aren't being expended at teaching algebra and things like that to my children, I am starting work on a fourth, and it's still in the playing around stage, scribbling down notes, but I'm glad to know that after 6 children, the youngest is
You still can keep your fingers in the pot there.
Yeah. He's almost a year old. But I thought, oh, I'm writing sentences. Oh, thank heaven.
Yay.
Its brain's still firing.
That's great. Well, I definitely hope, like I said, available at Ignatius.com is the Ignatius Critical Edition Dracula, as well as A Bloody Habit. And the whole Ignatius Critical Edition series is fantastic. And you've also contributed to other editions, and it sounds like you're still working on more. So, yeah.
And they're my go-to when I teach. I say, if there's an Ignatius Critical Edition, get it in, because I went through undergrad and grad school in a secular university. But I'll tell you, having an edition that you can read and not go, what?
Yeah, and that you can get your
true?
kids to read, and there's not
Yes.
weird essays in it that are like trying to make these crazy claims and read things into the novel that aren't there, that are through the modern lens. So
Yes.
yeah, that they're great. So it's great that you're working on those, and we appreciate you taking the time, because I know you're a busy lady. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today, and we do ask that if you enjoy this conversation, that you like it, subscribe to our podcast, and again, check out all of Eleanor's books at Ignatius.com. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank you, Rose, and everyone. Have a wonderful Halloween, All Saints and All Souls.
Ben.